Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is another monthly reading wrap-up and TBR video where July was, we'll say it was a pretty standard reading month for me. I got quite a bit accomplished, even though there were a few off days there a little bit, especially towards the end. I wasn't necessarily at the top of my game like I have been, reading a relatively exceptional amount for most of 2026 so far, but I wasn't really super far behind on very much of anything, all things considered. I did get a bit behind at the very end of the month, but we'll talk minor details on that front here relatively shortly. All that to say that I read a pretty solid amount in July, and I have a pretty solid amount set on my schedule for August, so let's talk about all of that right now. We'll begin just like normal with what I read last month on the novel slash novella side of things, although I guess one of these novellas that I'm going to be talking about I'm technically including in the short stories. We'll get there in just a second. I first read Equal Rights by Terry Pratchett, the third book in Discworld, and had an enjoyable time with this. I don't think I really enjoyed it as much as the first two books personally, even though there's more of a plot and character focus in this book compared to the first two books, generally being a little bit more about witty and creative ideas and stuff coming out. The way that certain bits of wit and creativity and equal rights come through is really great, and I did really enjoy the character journey, especially with regards to the main character, who I really liked a lot, maybe my favorite character of the three books so far. But I would say that Equal Rights was definitely not my favorite Discworld book so far. It's solid, has a lot of potential for some of the ways that Terry Pratchett could handle themes and the like in the future of the series, but certainly not the most memorable title in my opinion. Had a good time with it, but not even my favorite of the first three Discworld books. The next book that I read, however, was a pretty sharp turnaround, we shall say, because Legacy of Ash by Matthew Ward was really, really good, and maybe, one of the more memorable reading experiences that I've had this year, especially when it comes to fantasy. Just the construction of a lot of things within this book really, really impressed me. Sometimes you feel like books are doing a little bit too much and start to feel a little bit unrealistic because of it. Other books you feel like aren't doing nearly enough with the word count that they've been given, and so you just kind of feel lost a little bit because the story's not really doing the thing that it should be doing. This book featured neither of those problems for me. I think that maybe some readers will find, I would say, like maybe the latter third of the book to have some very minor conveniences in certain ways that might be bothersome, or might not necessarily feel like Deus Ex Machina, as I said in one of my bi-weekly updates recently, but have some things going on that maybe some people will point at and be like, okay, that's maybe a little bit convenient. I was willing to overlook those very minor issues because I loved this book so much, and it's constructed, frankly, a lot better and a lot more fully than most fantasy books tend to be. A lot of them have like a big battle at the end, but then there's like no resolution afterwards. This book has a big battle halfway through and then proceeds to have a political climax in another location afterwards, and then has resolution for both of those locations in the final, I would say, like quarter of the book or something like that, or at least over the last 150 pages out of 750. So like this book has a lot going on with it and fully justifies its runtime. It's not often when you have a book that's 250,000 words that feels like it wastes none of them. That book wasted none of them. Next up, a book that I just finally finished reading this morning as of recording, and I'm recording this the evening before it goes live. I'm a little bit behind on a lot of stuff as of recent, but, Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, the first book, Sword of Summer, reread this, so that would be the first time reading this since it came out, I'm pretty sure I read it pretty much right as soon as it came out. That would have been 2015. Ish. It might have taken until 2016 for me to finish. So here in 10 or 11 years since the book came out, first experience with it, and it was enjoyable. There are some ways in which this book aged a little bit better for me than I thought it would, and other ways in which it bothered me that I don't remember necessarily it bothering me before, not because I recognize things differently, but just because of the way that I consume stories now, if that makes any sense. There were some things about this book that I'm not 100% sure how I feel about yet as of this reread, because it's a lot longer. It's more akin to the pacing of one of the Heroes of Olympus books, for example, but the Heroes of Olympus books have, 3 to 5 narrators a piece, maybe even a little bit more than that in case or two. I don't remember off the top of my head, but this book goes back to the Percy Jackson style where it's just one narrator, with one exception. There's an epilogue in this book, which is really weird because I think it's the only one of these Percy Jackson universe books to have one of those. But even if not, like, that was a little bit weird, but otherwise it is just a first person single narration, story, and, stretching out the amount of things that go on. The first half of the book was really well done in that regard. The back half felt like it was running its wheels at a couple points. I'm not sure, if the pacing was as tight as I would have liked personally. We'll see how that continues with the next couple of books, because the other interesting thing is the back half of this book had a lot of scenes that I thought I remembered being from the second book. So that was a little bit of a surprise, but that's what I read with regards to the novels. With regards to some more shorter fiction that I got through this month, I did a little bit of reading with Christopher Rocchio's work. I'm just about coming up on a project that is more or less necessitating me to reread Queen of Mid-Ashes, plus a few of the other stories that take place in the approximate time period of Demon in White. Spoiler alert. So that being Queen of Mid-Ashes, and then the short stories The Night Captain, The Demons of Air, plus a third story that I'm not going to say the title right here because I don't know if the title is public. It is one of the two new stories that's going to be in Sins of the Sun Eater next year, a previously unpublished story that was written several years ago, shortly after Demon in White was written, and all of these stories hit really different. Even though this is my third time reading Queen of Mid-Ashes, The Night Captain, and The Demons of Air, there are certain things that I'm catching in these reads even more so than I caught even on my first rereads of them a few years back. And I'm not entirely sure why that's hitting, but like a lot of the foreshadowing in Queen of Mid-Ashes in particular was really hitting. Like those first couple of chapters make very obvious, some of the reveals that you get later in the book that I frankly overlooked. Even on my first reread, I kind of overlooked a lot of those hints and nods, which is really, really interesting. But so I had an enjoyable time with these stories, including with the new one that is, like I said, I don't know if the title's been revealed yet. It is a Demon in White era story, both in terms of when it was written and when it takes place. And I think that it actually pairs with, particular relevant sequence in Demon in White quite well. But that's all I'll say about that, because, I don't want to get in trouble for revealing information that is not public yet. I probably wouldn't, but, we'll wait until Sins of the Sun Eater has a more proper announcement to go into all of that information. Outside of the novels and the short stories, however, I did also read a little bit of manga this month, and that was the first 2 books, or the first 4 volumes of Vinland Saga, and I gotta tell you what, really, really big fan of this so far. Every one of these 4 volumes so far has been easy 5 stars, not even a question. They've been really solid. Characterization is great. Dialogue is great. The general artwork is really good and has improved with each volume. Like book 2 in particular didn't have basically any of the very minor things that were bothering me from book 1, which might just have been, stylistic in terms of scene setup and all of that kind of stuff. But when it comes down to like the actual story and how much I'm enjoying it so far, I'm enjoying it a ton. So at this point, I'm halfway through the slave arc, or the prologue arc, and it's really, really good. I'm in love with it. Also, I didn't even really do this on purpose, where I was reading, Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard being Norse stuff at the same time as Vinland Saga. I didn't coordinate the start of that to be 2 Norse things happening at the same time. But between those things and also wanting to replay the Dad of War games recently, that's maybe a little bit too much Norse in my life at the same time, so maybe I avoid doing that. But that is what I read in July. Let's talk about my book of the month. And frankly, if you were listening to the way that I was talking about all that stuff, and especially if we just what's the term that I'm looking for? I was going to say disinclude, but like, I don't know if that's a term. So we're just going to say, even if you discount Sun Eater reread stuff for the possibility of book of the month, Legacy of Ash still ends up being my book of the month in July, because this was awesome. Like, it was my favorite fantasy book that I've read in 2 years. One of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, and really just did everything right for me and what I was looking for in fantasy. Especially now that I'm done with the Wheel of Time, this kind of reverted back to, a little bit more of an origin that I was looking for, but that origin not, frankly, in many regards, feeling overly tropey, and with a lot of the creative decisions and certain world building and, character-based ideas going on here that make this really stand apart from that series in particular, but I think that this is definitely an overlooked fantasy book insofar as BookTube is concerned that I've seen. I don't know how many other people have covered that book, but I think more people should read it or at least give it a shot. It's a little bit slow in the first act in particular because it's building a lot of things and it is very politically oriented. This is more of a political fantasy than it is an action fantasy, I would say. If you were to combine those two ideas together, there's plenty of action in it, but with the very political side of the fantasy coming through and it doing that really excellently, in my opinion. Very good book. I enjoyed it a ton. Definitely my book of the month for July. But now that we're done talking about July, that means that it is time to talk about August and what I plan to read this month, and there's no small amount of stuff that I'm going to be working on this month. Well, some of it is inherently not going to end up being finished. Some of it is more likely than not to be pushed back, so we'll see what ultimately ends up happening with some of this stuff. But the main thing that I'm going to start off with is, at the time of this video's release on Tuesday is actually the day that I'm going to be starting Mort, obviously. The fourth book of Discworld, continuing on with this journey. This is by all means the book that people say it's no small amount of people's first book in Discworld. It's often recommended as a starting point for the series, and when I was getting into the series, even when I was planning to start with the very first book, you know, I had one of my friends telling me that this would very likely be the book where it really clicked, and so this is the reason why I was willing to give the book at least 4, if not like 6 entries before I would determine whether I would continue or not, for, you know, 100% certainty. At this point, it's looking like I'm going to continue because I've already enjoyed the first 3 books, but I'm excited to see what Mort has for me. Just, you know, the little bits that I've gotten from Death as a character so far in the previous books, and just the kind of concept of what this is going to be. Seems like it's going to be a ton of fun, but also have some of those more real moments as well. I'm really looking forward to giving this one a shot, so this will be basically my read this week is what I'm planning to do. So that's the first book. The next book that I plan to read this month is to continue the Legacy trilogy by Matthew Ward, continuing on with Legacy of Steel. Not quite as long as the first book, but it's only like 25 pages shorter, so it's right around the same page count. So, you know, it'll still take me a little while. Legacy of Ash only took me 2 weeks, I should note as well. So I actually read through that a good bit quicker than I thought. I was anticipating 3 weeks for that, and I'm anticipating 3 weeks for this as well, just in case. But, you know, if I read it anywhere near as quickly as Legacy of Ash, it might only take a couple of weeks, and I think that that's very possible. And given the way, this is also something I should have noted about Legacy of Ash. Legacy of Ash is book 1 of a trilogy, and in some ways that's pretty obvious, but it is a fully closed arc in and of itself. All of the things that it makes clear that it is setting out to do, it does. That's why it has so much resolution at the end, is because it's not trying to leave any of those things inherently hanging, so that the arc of this second book is very clearly going to be a new arc. It's going to have the same characters, same world, like all that same stuff. It's still going to be a book 2, but it's moving on into a different phase of all of that compared to the first book, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what that has in store, what the conflicts associated therein are going to look like. Really looking forward to Legacy of Steel because of how much I enjoyed Legacy of Ash, so, you know, can't wait to give this a shot very, very soon. Other than those 2 books, the next book that, if I have time for it at the end of the month, just like I did with Sword of Summer, The Hammer of Thor, Book 2 of Magnus Chase, is going to be my little bit of a palate cleanser in between Legacy of Steel and the next Discworld book, basically, as far as my personal reading stuff goes. Looking forward to giving this a try. You know, like I said with the Sword of Summer, there are plenty of scenes from that book that I thought I remembered being from this one, and I've only read these first 2 books, so I really honestly don't know how much I remember from this book. Maybe nothing, because we went through basically everything I remembered from the first book, plus some more stuff, and now that those scenes were taken away from me, I don't remember what this book does at all from several years ago, so I'm looking forward to seeing what that is, just kind of out of that curiosity side of things. We'll see how things go along, and I'm hoping that the pacing is slightly better this time around. You know, this book is like 40, 50 pages shorter than the Sword of Summer is, which is, in my opinion, most likely going to be a good thing, so we'll see what happens with that. The only other novel-related thing that I have on my TBR this month is, it's more of a work project than anything else, and I kind of teased it earlier when I said that I read Queen of Mid-Ashes and some other short stories related to Demon in White. That is because this month I'm actually going to be starting to work on the copy edit for Demon in White for special edition related stuff. So for the High Matter and Antarida versions of the book, I'm going to have very slightly updated text, not as much as the first two because there's not as much to need to work on at this point. At this point, Christopher had his, writing a little bit more to what he preferred. So not many changes here, but I'm going to be reading this. I'm holding up the hardcover book for referential purposes. This isn't the version that I'm going to read because I have a document that I have to actually work through on it. So I'm not entirely sure how much of this I'm going to get through this month, but almost certainly this is going to take a couple of months to actually get through all of the way because of how long copy editing takes and also because of other projects that we've got going on. So no idea how long that's going to take, but I will at least be starting Demon in White this month. So that's what I've got on the novel side of things. But, that's not everything that I have to say about my TBR this month. I also am going to be getting back into some short story reading. I did post a video on the channel. Was it late June, I think? It might have even been July. I don't remember. It's been too long. I talked about, covering short stories on the channel again, and with Edgar Allan Poe being one of the main authors whom I did cover on Short Story Sundays here a few years ago, I plan to cover some more Poe this month. What does that entail? Well, instead of covering each individual short story in its own video, especially not with, the not so iconic ones that people are just going to be searching up, right? I'm thinking of covering a handful of short stories in each one of these videos, especially for some of these authors whose primary output was short stories and that kind of thing, just for the sake of being able to do a little bit more with those videos. We're just kind of testing the waters. I'm not 100% sure what short story coverage is going to look like in the future, but that means that I'm planning to reread the first 4 stories by Edgar Allan Poe, those being Metzengerstein, The Duc de l'Omelette, A Tale of Jerusalem, and A Loss of Breath, just Loss of Breath. Those 4 stories, which I did cover on Short Story Sundays, and then a 5th story that I have not read yet called Bon Bon. And those 5 I'm going to cover collectively in one video. Even if I even if I do individual videos for each short story in the future, this first video later in the month when I cover Poe again is going to cover those first 4 because I've technically already talked about them to some extent on the channel, plus the new ones. So that's kind of my thinking there. We'll see how things go in the future, but more short story stuff. I haven't read very much short story related things in a good long while, so that is hopefully going to fix that a little bit. As for manga, I don't plan to just be done with Vinland Saga after all that I just said about loving those first couple of books so far. So right now I've got tentatively planned books 3 and 4, the rest of the prologue arc, the rest of those, first 8 volumes basically to complete that arc. A couple chapters of book 4 at the very end of volume 8 are moving on into the next arc, but for all intents and purposes, volume 8 is where that ends. So hopefully I can get both of these done, just like I did with the first couple of books. Although, actually, volume 4, the last volume of book 2, I actually just read, again, kind of like I finished The Sword of Summer this morning. I also just read volume 4 of Vinland this morning, too. So, it might be that I get a little bit behind and this bleeds into September a little bit. But I do plan to continue Vinland Saga because I was really enjoying that. So there you have it. That is my reading wrap-up and my TBR, everything that I read in July, my book of the month, of course, which I think that you should read if you're into fantasy at all. You should give Legacy of Ash a try. I really liked that book. And then everything that I plan to read this month, got some pretty exciting things on the horizon. Let me know what you've got going on reading-wise this month. I would be interested to hear about it, so go ahead and do that if you want. But for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.